Rage Badger Gaming here, and we're doing another class tier list, but this time you voted. So we had over 1,700 people vote, which is huge. The other poll that I've seen that actually has a lot of votes on it, but doesn't have all the classes, has over 600 votes. So when I got to see, like, we passed 1,000 and then eventually to 1,728, I was like, holy crap, you're such a wonderful community. So there is an algorithm we use to normalize the scores because some people didn't vote, like the diviner. Over half the people just barely didn't vote on the diviner. So we have a way to get them from 1 to 5 stars. And I'll talk more about that algorithm in the Discord. If you want to join, I'll put a link in the description below. But let's just get into the class tier list. If you want more Gloomhaven content every week, be sure to like and subscribe. You guys are amazing. So it seems that Brute had a little bit of the community divided, tossing him between B and C tier because the way the scores are, this puts the Inox Brute actually pretty low. Honestly, it's interesting that there's almost a pretty clean split, and then you've got the rest of the community kind of dawdling around the others. You actually have quite a few people even putting it in the A tier. Ultimately, though, I do really think that Inox Brute does deserve its low rank. Overall, its cards are mostly behind the curve, and you have some insane stuff you can do later. It's one of those things like you need high prosperity, certain items unlocked at a certain level, at least level 7, and then you can really get things going. The Cragheart, so a little bit of a community divide with some of the people, like about half the community saying it's B tier, which is sad because what are you talking about, my boy Cragheart? Cragheart, the best starter in the game? Come on. Anyway, I think he should be A tier. I do see a fair bit of the community there, but there's not a lot of huge consensus beyond like the fact that I think half the community wants to be B tier, but the other half has decided between a third of them being A tier and then a bunch of people. Who's putting Cragheart in D tier? Come on, guys. I do wonder if it's possible that one of the biggest strengths of the Cragheart is direct damage and being able to put obstacles to manipulate monster behavior. And I do wonder if some people didn't necessarily experiment with that so much before they voted. And that's okay. So the Scoundrel ends up also falling in the B tier because you see 47% of the community. That's still quite a bit saying it's B tier. But you actually see a significant amount of the community putting it in the A tier, putting it just shy from the score. The Scoundrel's falling in at 3.3 and he needed to be a 3.4 to hit the A tier. By the way, we did the rankings. Again, I'll talk about that more in the Discord. I do wonder, it's really because you actually had a significant amount of people putting Scoundrel in C tier, and there's actually a handful that put the Scoundrel in the A tier. So really it's kind of all over the place, but ultimately just voted in the B tier. I do think that people value it very highly because early on there's a couple bosses, and with Smoke Bomb you can just destroy. I mean, Smoke Bomb backstab, that's one way to just kill bosses really fast, and I think people probably saw that potential and goes like, wow, the Scoundrel's overpowered. Plus the potential it has to get a lot of loot, you can scoop up a bunch of items. I think people generally lean that as a little bit one of the more powerful starters, just from my guess. Alright, so we have the Tinker, which is the lowest ranked class in the poll at 1.87. That's not great at all. This is kind of all over the place because you can see these 3 big pies, although one of them, the biggest pie, is a C tier, but it's very close to the D tier. They're almost the same. But then you still have like 16% of the people putting it in the B tier. So like, there's some people who have faith in the Tinker. I really don't. I think it's actually, I don't think the Tinker is necessarily bad, but it's one of those where if you could, like in a vacuum, playing the Tinker long-term in a campaign, there's just some problems with it just because of high-level cards. We don't need to go into the detail of it, but I like how it plays when you jump into it, when you start Gloomhaven. It's well suited as a starter, but it just doesn't do well later. Sorry, Tink. So Mindthief becomes our first A tier at 3.47. Good job, Mindthief. Actually, here's the thing. 44% of the community is like, Mindthief is A tier. And not only that, but you have plenty of people who put it in S tier. Wow, Mindthief S tier. I would never actually put it on that rank, but I do think the Mindthief is a pretty strong class. It's got a lot of non-lost stuns, which are seriously too powerful, and it's got really good damage. It's a little squishy, but it's got ways around it. So Also, because it has such an A tier, you actually only have 35% putting it in the B tier. So, I mean, the rest of it, the amount of people voting it low is the end up. This barely made the A tier, but hey, it made it, and that's what counts. I don't fault this rating, although I still would have put it in the upper B tier personally. So the Spellweaver at 3.24 puts it, I mean, look at all over the place. So you have like, that's the thing about the Spellweaver. Just take a look at the chart. You have a significant amount just putting it in the middle. So that's fine, 43%. But then you have 30% saying like, dude, this class is powerful. And then you actually have 15% of the people saying that this is below B tier. So this one definitely divided the community a little bit more, but clearly the community sided mostly with B tier, and that's fine. This is a hard class to put a finger on because hi everyone, this is Velvet, and she loves interrupting videos. Velvet, do you have something you want to say? She says like and subscribe. Thank you. Velvet, please go. So the Spellweaver basically has 3 ways it plays. It plays where it burns a bunch of AoE losses, blowing crap up at low levels and getting them back. The mid levels, you're basically just trying to figure out getting the right elements in play just to exploit cold fire. It's especially easy if you have a Mindthief playing with you. But really, once you learn to like use like, you know, World in Flames, Prismatic Sphere, or Chromatic Orb, whatever, I don't know. I'm getting D&D spells confused. But those 2 cards with cold fire just becomes very easy to just AoE high attack stun shit and just pew pew. It's a little boring. And then of course the final tier where you just try to find a way to exploit Inferno. I don't necessarily think that's the most fun. I love the level 1 version, and I really wish I would have kept that. I did do a Spellweaver revision which focuses on net play style over time, but ultimately I do agree that the spamming the shit out of Inferno build is really high powered. So keep going, Spellweaver. So the Red Guard ends up being right in the middle of the list at 3.26. As you can see, the next classes, the Jaws classes and the Diviner, are going to have the most amount where people didn't play it. So we have a much smaller. Like I said, we have 1,728 people who voted, but less than 1,000 people weighed in on the Jaws classes. So keep that in mind. Even then, it still has like between, you know, 700 to 900, depending on what class we're talking about, people weighing in on it. So it's still a pretty big sample size. So even looking at this though, you can see clearly a lot of people say, hey, this is a B tier class, but you still see that it's a little leaning A tier. But keep in mind, since a lot of people were leaning on the upper tiers in general, the way how they voted, 3 stars is not actually the median. The median's 3.2. So 3.26, thank you. Velvet's running around destroying my miniatures, lady. Velvet, what do you want? Something to note though, the Red Guard translates very well into Gloomhaven, just only because there's so many more ways for some of the other Gloomhaven classes to give shield, and with shield spikes you can really exploit this, even from some of the starters, and of course with the Saw class, which we'll get into later. Ultimately though, I do think the Red Guard deserves a little bit of a bump from 3.2, but you know, this is your vote, this isn't mine. The Demolitionist, yay! The second lowest at 2.28. That's just not great at all. 2.28. Yes, you can see a lot of the people put this in the bottom tier. I guess only like 78 people. That's still, seriously, 78 people think this is like the worst class in the game. Man, they're so mean. But seriously, most of the people ended up putting it in the bottom tier. And like I said, since this 3.2, so this ends up being D tier as a result. But poor Demolitionist. Even in the case of Jaws, the early scenarios really support its cards very well with having lots of obstacles to destroy. Unfortunately though, like that's kind of a lot it has going for it. Then you've got the middle tiers where it just, they forgot to put stuff in there, and then the end there's still some stuff, but it's just really annoying that the Demolitionist has that experience in Jaws, and then it doesn't have like enough mobility. It's level 5 losses and it doesn't translate well, and there's not as much like objectives, obstacles necessarily to interact with Gloomhaven. I think a lot of people were pretty upset translating Demolitionist over, so I don't disagree with its spot here. Hatchet! Wow, Hatchet at 3.53, putting it one of the highest rated classes. There's actually 3 classes at 3.53. This is the smallest of them though, but seriously, like, wow. So people are really high on the Hatchet, which is not surprising. Number one, its burst damage, if on command, can be insane. Like I said, it's incredibly easy to pull out like attack 18s and attack 20s at low level. And not only that, but it's not hard to get advantage. So just, yeah, that's dumb. It's easier to set up than the Scoundrel too, and uses less cards. It's silly. And it's at range instead of melee. So, yeah, but it has really good burst damage potential. Like the Scoundrel, it's got really good looting. You're often constantly going after your axe, so just playing to get more damage also gives you more loot. I can see why people thought this was a very strong class, and I don't disagree. It's a really strong contender. It's depends on how you min-max it. It can be one of the best out of Jaws, but it might even be the 3rd best. I'm not even kidding. I think that a well-played Redguard and a well-played Voidwarden can do better, but that's just my take on it. I do think, however, on the whole, the average player, just playing an average Hatchet normally, can do a kick-ass job, and ultimately, I think that's really just good class design. All right, Voidwarden at 2.86, to which I say, how fucking dare you guys? How would you do this to my girl, Voidwarden? She's wonderful. Look at this. She has monster control. She has disarms and stuns. She has so many curses. And she has the ability to, like, give people, and she interacts with certain classes. Actually, play a Drifter with a Voidwarden. That's great. But also a Mindthief. She interacts so well with so many classes, actually. And she's a valid, like, she brings things to so many scenarios that are insane. Like, there's a lot of things where she can, like, make enemies do shit. And, like, it's funny to do these on, like, bosses and stuff. No, like, it's just really, she's actually a really well-designed character. I'm a huge fan of her. And I think there's a bit of nuance to playing with her. That said, I'm not surprised as a result that, like, 10% of the people that voted put her in C tier. And even then, that's like about half. So like 20% of the people that weighed in on her said that she's like below average. I understand it's harder to play and it's not like easy to pick up, but oh man, I really would have put her, I would have put her notably higher. I think the Voidwarden's one of the strongest. So I strongly disagree with you, community. And speaking of disagreeing with the community, the Diviner. Wow, 2.8. The Diviner's in the right hands is incredible. It has a lot of hard crowd control. It has, like, it's got the ability to basically predict when you need to do certain attacks, what's coming up. You get so much knowledge from it that sometimes it's just too much. And a really well-played Diviner in a really, strong group can just trivialize almost every scenario. That said, it's not the best in all scenarios. It's definitely not as strong in 2 players, so you have to take that into consideration. Not only that, but a lot of people's first experience with Diviner is in Forgotten Circles, which is notably much harder than the other scenarios. So, where does that put it? I think a lot of people think like, man, this is hard. And maybe it's the Diviner, but maybe it's Forgotten Circles. But it doesn't really matter where you weigh in on it. I do think that her rating in C tier is notably below where she should be. She should at least be in B, but I would put her in A tier because she is powerful, girl. So we're going to move into the locked classes. So if you want to, I have bookmarked everything, so you can just skip around if you haven't unlocked a class yet. Angry Face! So, wow, Angry Face. You guys really put the Doomstalker really high at 3.53 at the 6th highest class in the game. Jesus, dudes. Well, I mean, I'm not that surprised. This is another class that's easy to play and easy to play well. And not only that, but a well-played Doomstalker can just destroy stuff. I don't necessarily think it's that fun, personally, but he is pretty effective, so I don't necessarily disagree. Honestly, I might even put it lower, but I think I'm fine with it in the A tier. But the community has a little bit of all over the place, though. If you look that there's still most of the people, a considerable amount that did vote on it, put it in A tier, and another considerable put it in the B tier. So they think it should be somewhere in that zone, but you still actually have quite a few. This is another one of the classes where quite a few people ended up putting in the S tier. I'd love to see the people that had experienced that, what kind of gameplay they had with it, because it is one of those classes where, with blesses and the right sped ups, and it does have Expose, one of the most busted cards in the game, but I don't necessarily think this is a terrible placement, but go Doomstalker. Circles! Wow, so the Summoner is at 2.43, just barely keeping it out of the D tier. Another class I strongly disagree with. I did try to provoke people by putting it very high in my most recent tier list, like last year, if only because I do think it's actually a good class. I do think played well. It actually puts a shit ton of effort. During our Let's Play campaign, I showed off in a few scenarios just how busted the Summoner can be. Unfortunately, though, there are some scenarios where they don't play well. You kind of have to pregame a lot, and ultimately, I can get that maybe it's a little frustrating to have your whole character balanced on, like, all right, I need to bring this. You have to put a lot of thought just to, like, compare with, like, you know, the Angry Face. Honestly, I think they're pretty comparable in terms of what they can do. I'd still put the Summoner better, but clearly one's notably easier to play, and this one's harder. And the community can't even agree where to put it. Like, look at this. You've got, like, 10% of the people saying, dude, this is powerful. You have, like, 28% that are like, dude, you know, this is actually a pretty well-balanced class. Then, the thing is, you have 27% like, this sucks. And 15% is like, this is the worst. This is bottom. This is trash. This is Tinker equivalent. Like, it's all over the place. The community cannot agree on circles. Like the Diviner, Summoner, it's interesting, and I think that's cool. That means people have had much different experiences with the Summoner all across the board, and that's just, I think, interesting. Cthulhu! So the Plague Herald is another one the community is not super agreeing on, but they're definitely putting it somewhere in the A-B tier. Unfortunately, at a 3.36, he's just fallen out of A tier and at the top of the B tier. That's about right for him, I think. I'd honestly, it depends on what the group is. It's one of those where it's hard to like rate all these classes in a vacuum anyway, but high B tier sounds about right. It also depends on what version you get used to, but even then, this is one of the classes that got nerfed in the second printing. So like this and Lightning Bolt and Scoundrel, I think there are more changes than that I think of, but anyway, so the Plague Herald really does bring a lot. I do think if you just said, let's make the best 4-player party, I would actually include a Plague Herald, just because of its synergy with some of the most other powerful classes, and just what he can bring with his toolkit. On its own, though, at low levels, and especially because it's actually easy to unlock this at low levels, I think there's situations where it's not satisfying, or it levels up slow, or it's not contributing as much, so I can see how some people ranked it lower than others because of those situations. So there's not much to talk about here. This is the most community consensus we've gotten in this whole poll, 64%. Not only that, but a sixth of the community didn't even vote. So that means out of the rest, seriously, almost 2/3 of the community said this class is busted, putting it the highest score at 4.7. I don't think there's much to say this class is broke. Even if you look at it, some of the other people that voted, 14% said that this is powerful. So it's either too powerful, didn't vote, and then you've got a little sliver of people who disagree there. But really, it is busted. Next class. Lightning. So the Berserker, this is one of the highest ones. Actually, here's the funny part though. So the S tier, we have 3. And the cutoff for S tier, there's such huge, because like some of these classes only have like fractional differences between, they all do, but like 0.2 or 0.1 between them. And there's a 0.6 drop off between the worst S and the best A. And so the Berserker is the highest rated A tier class. Good job. I don't disagree. I think this, first off, look, the amount of people that wanted to put in the S tier, holy shit. It's a powerful class. However, I do think it is in a different tier. I do think I'd put Lightning and Sun in their own like halfway between S and A, because they definitely have things that make them too busted on their own. but they're a little bit ahead of the other A tiers, but they're definitely not on the same tier as the S. So this definitely comes off that way, though, the way people voted, because, like I said, you've got a bunch of people in the 3.5 and 3.4s, but then you have 3.9, 3.7, and then after that you have 4.5 and higher. There's a gigantic leap. The Lightning Bolt, first off, Berserker has so many nonetheless stuns. It's incredible. Has insane burst damage potential, can just slay bosses. Not only that, but it AoEs well with several of its cards. It's a very strong class, and it deserves this spot. It's really fun, too. So this not only that, but I think people loved destroying monsters with this, had so much fun, saw how effective it was, and said, maybe this is too powerful. And spoiler alert, it is. Here's the thing, though. When we've been testing Frosthaven feedback, I've been trying to set like a standard of how powerful is this, and I don't want anything to be, I mean, obviously we don't want any S tiers, but I don't want any class to be as powerful as the Berserker. Again, I still think that's too high a standard. Sorry, guys. And I don't think any class in Frosthaven, spoiler alert, I don't think any class is as good as the Berserker out of all the ones introduced. So if you got used to this level of power, bring that down a little bit. I'm sorry. So, music note. Another S tier. I don't think anyone's surprised by this with a 4.5 rating. The community mostly agrees with, 15% not voting, but then you have 56%, which is one of the biggest consensuses in the whole game. 56% say it's S tier. Not only that, but you still have a lot of vote for A. So I don't think I really need to elaborate. The Soothsinger has an insanely good attack modifier deck. Its songs are busted. Disorienting Dirge is just one of the most broken cards in the game. Yeah, next class. Saw. So I think some people realized I've been baiting people into saying the Saw is a bad class. I don't disagree, but it's still pretty lowly rated at the 3.11 by the community. I'd like to wonder where that's coming from. But not only that, but people can't even put a finger on where it is. Like, just take a look at this graph. You have like a quarter of the people saying it's like too powerful. You have some people saying that the Sawbones is up there in the S tier with the 3 broken dudes. Okay, you have almost a third of the community saying it's middle of the road. And then even then, you have like, between those other tiers, like you have 15% of the people saying that the Sawbone is at least below average. Yeah, so the community doesn't really know where to put Sawbone, so I honestly think it's kind of in between B and A. I think upper B. I think it's got really, especially in 2-player count, because it's hard crowd controls, which it has lots of. It's incredibly powerful and almost as reliable as the Mindthief. I don't think it hits as hard, but it has a little bit more utility. Also, its combo potential is incredible, especially if you pair it with like, Red Guard or Lightning Bolt. So, I think you're in the right tier, but I think the score is a bit low. I'd put it a little higher. Sun! A tier. Again, this is another one. 3.7, putting it right in that little gap between all the other A tiers and the S tiers, kind of bouncing with the Lightning Bolt. I'm not surprised here. The community generally agrees. 10% didn't vote. But then you have 10% that said S tier, and then 50% said it's too powerful. I think between that, we can effectively say the community generally agrees that this class is a little too powerful. And it is. So I don't think there's really much to elaborate. I think the numbers on it are tuned just a little too high, and defensive stance, the pip on it breaks it. Honestly, I think just a handful of cards could just have a couple of numbers tuned down, and removing that pip kind of makes this class balanced, while not really changing it drastically. This is another class I don't think you need to do a lot of changes to make it more balanced. Three Spears. So who would have guessed the Quartermaster's in the S tier? The second highest voted class at, what, 4.556? Yeah. Uh-huh. I mean, it's one of those where if you're like level 1, Prosperity 1, if you somehow pulled that off, I don't know how, you're probably like, this class isn't that great. It's not bad, but it's certainly not like the greatest like game-breaking class ever. But the more higher Prosperity and higher level you get, this class just gets more and more busted. I don't think this class would be nearly as broken. Seeing the Frosthaven items, moving this class over to Frosthaven, which you should be playing the Frosthaven classes. I think this class would take a bit of a step down. I think the item access in Gloomhaven, there's some items that are clearly overpowered, and I think that this class just exploits that. However, there's really not much to say. I think people know, like, big power potions, infinite stamina, you know, getting everything back, AoEing, blowing up whole rooms, you know, the whole deal. This class will just destroy rooms, and it can solo some scenarios, and in some cases never run out of stamina in a game where you have, like, stamina as a mechanic to hold you back. Yeah. Anyway, second most powerful class is voted by you guys, the Quartermaster. The Triforce, putting it in the middle of the C tier. All right, you guys are pretty harsh on it. I don't necessarily disagree. However, this is another one. This is probably one of the ones the community disagreed on the most. If you take a look, there's actually some people putting this in the S tier. Not many, but there's some. About 22% say, I didn't vote on it. But then you have like 26% saying this is undertuned, 27% saying it's fine, 13% saying like this class is too powerful, and then you have 9% people saying this class is trash. Okay, I mean, I know that generally veers a little bit in the BC area, but they're all over the place. If you just look at the numbers, also some of the feedback on it basically says depending on level, and this definitely is. Early unlock, early levels, this class feels like, honestly, kind of like a worse Spellweaver with less losses. It's weak. However, level 7 with some decent prosperity, you can carry people through scenarios. It's dumb. But it's really only banking on its vengeance. Everyone knows it's vengeance that just breaks this class. So everyone knows vengeance is too powerful, and you can exploit that when you get to that level. It's still a pretty decent class if you get some more like items to unlock it. And I think this is one of those that could really benefit from the like perk revisions that like Frosthaven has, like that's just much better. I think that this class could benefit hugely from that like new take. So unfortunately, it seems the community doesn't really know where to put it, so it puts just a little, like, on the, it's actually in the bottom 5, so, wow. You guys are mean to the little elements list. Too many. So, Beast Tyrant, unsurprisingly, is barely kept out of the top 5, man. Right behind Angry Face, but it's only just points behind it. So just barely out of the top 5 means, of course, you put it in the A tier. I think that the whole community says it has a pretty good idea. Over half, so 18% of people didn't vote, and then half the people said it is A tier or better. Then you have like, 25% that just say it's like average. Well, the whole point is just taking a look at the graph. For the most part, I think the community thinks this class is too powerful, or in that broken tier. Not many say it's broken, but I do think, first off, there are ways that this class is broken. Not so much in like, the Forgotten Circle scenarios, because relying on the monster behavior for all your effort is huge, but it does have cool stuff like Spirit Swap, and other stuff like that make it really, really good. But ultimately, there's so many scenarios where this guy can just destroy, and not only that, but it's really easy to play. And everyone knows, just like free attack 5s, and then you get 1 card to play after that. There's just can be busted. I know you're like, oh, go from 2 cards to 1 card, it's great, but then like move 3 attack 5, and then you still get to play 1/2 is still busted. It's a bottom, but you still have bottom attacks. Anyway, this is another one of those classes that can get really huge amounts of effort done, so I'm not surprised. I think it deserves that spot. So just taking a look at the chart here and looking at the scores, you can see that it's like the cutoff's 4.2 for S tier, but you can clearly see nothing's even remotely close to 4.2. Only 3 classes ended up being in the S. You have the 4.2 to 3.4, which barely keeps the Plague Herald out and has those classes firmly in there. Great 6 classes. It kind of ends up fitting pretty well. 3.0 to 3.4, which is actually pretty narrow. That's 0.4 to fit all this B tiers. Then you, of course, have the 2.3 to 3.0, which is all the C tiers, and then everything below that is a D tier. Ultimately, I don't agree. I agree for the most part, though. The top 5, honestly, makes sense to me, but it starts to fall apart there. I think a lot of the easier to play classes are ranked a little bit higher, and the ones with a little bit more nuance are ranked lower. So, not calling people bad, but I'm just saying that it doesn't surprise me that when you take an overwhelming amount of people, the classes that do the most amount of effort with the least amount of efforts do well. And that just makes sense. I think that if you like took like, you know, some of the Frosthaven playtesters, or even Gripeway, Gripeway's list actually has a different order than this, but I think we're generally pretty close. If you took out some of my troll placements, no offense, I'm really sorry, Saw. It was just funny because you guys can blame Dwarf 74, it's his fault. But seriously though, I do think depending on who you ask, if you're going 2 or 4 players, there's just a lot that goes into a ranking. So like these aren't just necessarily to say that, oh, this is the fact. It's not. But it is fun to see where people ended up voting, and this is, in my opinion, a pretty fun exercise. I do think I'd like to do more community interaction to see where people feel about other things, which we'll talk about later. I was thinking about saying like, what are your hardest scenarios? But I have my own ranking for that, so maybe I'll be doing that in another video coming up soon. So, out of all these classes, which is your favorite, and which do you want to talk about saying like that? You definitely underrated that community. How dare you? And which class do you think that the community is overrating? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe because we'll be doing more lists and way more Frosthaven content. So you guys keep being amazing. I will be putting up a little bit more elaboration on how I feel on some of these for patrons only. So if you want to head over to Patreon, check that out. And speaking of Patreon, thank you to all of our Inox tier patrons. All of you are just wonderful people. We thank you so much, and your support really, really helps our channel stay alive. And I really, really thank you for your support, and I thank all of you for watching.